Before we begin today's episode, I want to make something very clear. The events discussed in this podcast are based on my personal experience, documentation, and information provided to law enforcement and other authorities. Any references to individuals reflect allegations, statements, or findings as reported or submitted to appropriate agencies. These matters are part of a broader legal and factual record. Nothing in this podcast should be interpreted as final legal conclusion or guilt. The purpose of sharing the story is not to defame or attack, but to raise awareness regarding elder vulnerability, coercion, and the importance of accountability and transparency. With that said, this is my lived experience, and this is part 2 of Behind the Scenes with Rescuing Mom. Welcome back to Humanitarian Horizons. I am Christina DiArcangelo. And if you listen to episode 50, released January 13th of 2026, you will know where I left off. And at that time, I left off with my mother's home being secured by the authorities. We changed the locks. And what we uncovered next would change everything. After the party was secured, individuals had been told not to return. So the defendants, were told not to come back on the property. They were not allowed. They were being evicted, and they were told to take the things that they needed to take of their own, the personal possessions, etc. They were asked to take them, and including the children that were at the house too, because as you remember in the first part of this series, I talked about how there were children going to school at Phoenixville Area High School District. Not the high school necessarily, but the school itself. Anyway, what was very ironic was that we noticed that items started disappearing from the sheds located on the property. Yeah. And then advertisements appeared on Facebook Marketplace for the sale of car tires that had been left behind when these certain individuals were removed from the property. Those tires had not been taken at that time when the removal occurred. Yet suddenly they were being offered for sale. I guess they thought we wouldn't notice. I noticed. Regardless, I began working immediately with East Pikeland Police Department on obtaining evidence that I would find in the house to further assist on the prosecution of these crimes against my mom. I went to the house daily. Now, keep in mind, as you all know, I'm an executive. I run multiple companies. I'm also a single mom. So for me to be able to have to go to the house daily because I had to look at evidence and I had to look, for things, clearly that was impactful in my life. So again, as I said in the first part of this series, my life changed March 24th of 2022. Okay. So let's just go back to what I was saying. I would go to the house daily. I would go from room to room. I would photograph. I would wear gloves. I would capture the various things that I found in the house that could be used as evidence. Okay. I tried my best to preserve anything and everything that I thought might be relevant. Now, after the authorities had swept the house and gathered a ton of evidence that night, and when the parties were removed from the house due to my eviction, the next day I was over at the house and I discovered very, very interesting paperwork on the kitchen table in my mother's home. The paperwork that I found on the kitchen table were documents relating to the transfer of the deed to my mother's home. Okay. So evidently, I soon found out there was a individual that was called to the house, a notary actually, that was called to the house a day before my mom was rescued from the basement. And the perpetrators tried their most hardest to get a transfer of my mother's house deed to one of the defendants. Unfortunately for them, my mom never probated the will when my dad died in 15. So my dad's name, so the late Albert J. DiArcangelo Sr., was on the deed. Therefore, the notary couldn't possibly transfer any deed to any defendants. Thank goodness this happened. Could you imagine if my mom had probated the will and that they had that day transferred the house to themselves? Meanwhile, let me remind you, my brother did pass away at that time, okay, when this would have occurred. My brother died in January of 2022, but I was still alive, okay? So I don't know how they thought they were going to get away with this nonsense and the effect that if they tried to transfer with a woman who had severe mental health issues and was not of sound mind and memory. I don't know how they thought they were going to do this, but they thought, they tried, and they fucking failed. Yes, I said it. They fucking failed. 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 However, I took the documentation with gloves on. They even had the pen that they used, the one defendant used to write notes on what he needed to do in order to get this deed transferred. Yeah. Yeah. Inside the house, as I looked around, I noticed because now it was daytime. When I was there the day before, it was nighttime. It was like 8:15, 8:45 at night or something crazy like that. Okay. It was daytime. I walked around the inside of the property and I noticed that there was a huge, and I mean huge, I don't know, 80 plus inch TV mounted in the family room where my father had passed away. Yeah, that's where my father had passed away. And that was where his hospital bed was. And there was these big pieces of furniture in there, couch wise. I didn't recognize them, which was very odd to me that there was all this big furniture, this big TV, this entertainment center that lit up and had like a fireplace or something. I don't know. I have real fireplaces in my home. I don't know anything about these, but makeshift buying fireplaces. I don't know anything about it. But anyway, they had a big one of those in the family room where my dad died. There was a washer and dryer unit that was rented from Rent-A-Center, allegedly using my mother's credit card, despite the fact that there was already a functioning washer and dryer in the basement. The upstairs of the home was fully livable. Now, would I live in that home? No. Was the home messed up and had to be repaired in order to put it up for sale as is? Absolutely. They painted around pictures and did all kinds of poor, poor workmanship. It was not quality at all. Nothing that I would pay for. Let me just be clear, as far as a consultant, contractor would be concerned. However, the upstairs, remember, above my mom, where it was okay to live, functioning, everything was functioning, big TVs, beds, couches, a dining room set in our formal living room. It's no longer a formal living room, dark paint, track lighting. I mean, all these things, I don't know where they came from. They're not ours, right? As I found out later on in the story, they had sold our personal effects at a yard sale or something. And so basically all of these things were rent-a-center furniture. Most of it was, most of it. The couches, there were so many couches. The washer, the dryer, the big TV. I think the entertainment center thing, that big entertainment center with the fake fireplace, I think that was also Rent-A-Center. But I found out that there was considerable amounts of monies being paid to Rent-A-Center with the utilization of my mother's credit card that my mother never authorized anyone to use, especially Rent-A-Center that furniture she never got to sit on. Because remember, she wasn't allowed to come upstairs. Oh no, she had to stay in the basement where she belonged with the mold and the feces and all those things. Anyway, According to the statements provided to the authorities, my mother had been convinced that one of the perpetrators required back surgery and needed access to her master bedroom and master bathroom. But then renovations occurred that altered the home. Her stand-up shower, which was necessary for her to be able to shower regularly in because she had a double knee replacement, was removed. Yeah, removed. Not only was that removed, but then the linen closet that was attached right next to the shower, that was taken out so that a big soaking tub could be put in its place. A tub my mother could not physically use. Yeah. Meanwhile, the defendants decided to make a makeshift bathroom in the basement, remember? And so there was a toilet down there that was non-operating. There was a shower. The shower stall, I assume, that was upstairs was brought downstairs. I think that's what happened. And it was put in a corner, but it wasn't functional. There was no running water in that makeshift illegal bathroom. Remember, there was a bunch of illegal construction going on. Code enforcement was there the night before and cited the property for all the code enforcement issues, this being one of them. So, anyway, when my mom needed to shower, she would allegedly have to be escorted outside of her own home through the basement steps, the cement basement steps, through these metal doors. They're called Bilcor doors. Open them up. She would have to be escorted out the cement doors. She would make a left to go around the driveway to the side of the house and go in through the kitchen in her own fucking house. Yeah. Yeah, that's what was going on for her to be able to take a shower. She had to go outside the house to get back inside her own house. Therefore, access to bathing was completely controlled by the defendants. My mom didn't get to say when she wanted to take a shower. I don't even know how many times she was allowed to take a shower a week. She did not talk about it. She couldn't talk about it. That's how horrific the situation was for her. Additionally, when I was at the house the next day after we took it back, our covered patio. So my dad had a covered patio on the back of our house that had a roof. It was a really nice covered patio. We used to spend all these things out there, family celebrations, parties, whatever. We just hung out there. Okay. I used to spend a lot of my time out there with my dad, especially when I would come in when I was living in various states doing, work in various other states with my biotech career. And I would fly in and I would come and see my dad. And 9 times out of 10, we were on that back patio and we were hanging out. So much to my surprise, this back patio was completely enclosed with plywood. Horrific. Looked horrific. I mean, horrific. It would leak. The quality of the workmanship, whoever did it, did a very bad job because it was leaking. Yeah, it leaked. Yeah. I don't know what happened. But inside inside that office, because that's what it turned into, was an executive office suite. There was a couch in there. There was a washer and dryer. That's where the other washer and dryer was that I mentioned earlier in this podcast. And there was an executive uh, desk. My great grandmother's table, which was an antique and a one of a kind, was being used for bongs. Yeah, they had bongs. You guys know what bongs are? The cannabis things that it heats up and all this. Yeah, they were doing that in that room. There were a lot of bongs. And they were on my grandmother's table along with an ashtray. Yeah, that's what I found. On the night that my mother was removed by the authorities, she had to come out of her own home through the cement stairs, through the Bilcor doors. Yeah. She had to go up the cement stairs to get out, to catch the ambulance. Okay. These are not small details. They are context. They speak the control that was being put upon my mom, the types of control that these people had over her, the access, the isolation, The fact that they smashed her cell phone so she couldn't call anybody. They stopped paying the phone bill that I had, the phone that I had at my parents' house ever since I was a little girl. Yeah, that phone number's gone. That was gone. They stopped paying that bill. So there was no way for anybody to get a hold of her. There was no way for anybody to figure out that she was being trapped in the basement. They just wanted her money. And evidently, in the long scheme thing here, they wanted the house. They wanted to steal the house. That was the goal here, was to take that house. And here's what I want to emphasize. This story is not about revenge. It's about awareness. Elder abuse, elder financial abuse, and coercive control do not always look like what people expect it to look like. Sometimes they look like renovations. Sometimes they look like paperwork. Sometimes they look like someone who's helping out. But when you begin documenting patterns, when you preserve evidence, and when you cooperate with the authorities, the narrative quickly shifts from emotion to accountability. That is why Rescuing Mom exists. Not to sensationalize things, but to illuminate. In part three, we will talk about what happened next, more about the legal proceedings, the systematic hurdles, mental health, and the toll of navigating justice while protecting a parent. Because changing the locks was not the end of the story. Trust and believe. It was just the beginning. This is Humanitarian Horizons, and silence is not our default. I am Christina DiArcangelo. I'll see you in part three. Thank you for joining me today.